Plo Koon is a Keldor Jedi Master and lifetime member of the Jedi High Council, taking his place on the esteemed body to honour the dying wish of his fallen master, Tyvoka, a casualty of the Stark hyperspace war. He is the penultimate product of a long line of Jedi within his family, followed by his niece, Shaak, who also rose to prominence within the Order. He has trained 3 Padawan to knighthood, and his various skills and attributes have earned him a legendary reputation as one of the Order's greatest masters, even by the standards of the High Council. Shaak Ti is a Togrutan Jedi Master and is also a member of the Jedi High Council, though her membership is a long-term one and not a lifetime position. She earned her place on the Council after the loss of Master Yaddle in an incident on Mawan in 26 BBY. She trained 2 Padawan to knighthood, though both were killed shortly after their knighting in early missions, leading some members of the Council to question her unique teaching methods. Ti's aptitude for combat is one of the highest in the Order, and Obi-Wan Kenobi himself regarded her as the most cunning Jedi he had ever met.
Darth Tyranus, former Jedi Master and later Count, was born 102 years before the Battle of Yavin. Dooku was taken into the Jedi Academy as a young boy, where he would learn directly under Thame Cerulean. Though Dooku was highly regarded within the ranks of the Jedi Temple, he would eventually leave the Academy in favor for an apprenticeship under Darth Sidious. One of the few Sith to keep his title of Darth almost entirely secret, the infamous Count Dooku was the face and head of the Sith-controlled Confederacy of Independent Systems, pulling the strings of the dark side for his master, Sidious. Dooku trained many apprentices, as both a Jedi and a Sith, among them Qui-Gon Jinn, Komari Vosa, General Grievous, Asajj Ventress, and Savage Opress. By the war's end, he would be betrayed by his master Sidious, defeated and murdered by Anakin Skywalker. Still, Tyrannus' abilities rank amongst the best of his time. His swordsmanship and skills in the Force thought to rival the likes of Yoda and Mace Windu themselves. Darth Maul was a Dathomirian adult male born 54 years before the Battle of Yavin. As an infant, Maul was taken from Mother Talzin by Darth Sidious, who would eventually train him in the dark side of the Force. However, Maul would not get a full Sith training and instead was trained more as an assassin for Darth Sidious and Darth Plagueis. Maul would be the first Sith to expose himself after a millennia, fighting against Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, though he would be defeated by the former. He would return to prominence when his brother and later apprentice, Savage Opress, recovered him from Lotha Minor. Maul made a play for the galactic stage himself, attempting to overthrow his old master as the new Dark Lord of the Sith. His ambition was ruined by Sidious personally, however, who captured Maul and killed his brother. Maul would make another attempt with Mother Talzin, but Sidious would uproot his plans again. Still, Maul was possibly one of the most refined martial artists of the Sith Order.
Hello everyone, Retty4 here. Welcome to Antoine and I's second versus video collaboration. I am immensely sorry for the long wait, it's almost entirely my fault. I had a month-and-a-half long moving process getting in the way, followed by another month of no internet connection, and when I finally got back online, my PC decided to die on me and needed a replacement heatsink. Naturally, with all that resolved, a bunch of work issues then reared their ugly head. When I finally got all of that out of the way and was set to go, Antoine then had his own workload issues, mostly due to his recent entry for the Lightsabre Choreography competition, which is definitely worth a watch by the way. Link in the description. As you can imagine, all of this threw a wrench into the works concerning the video release, and I do apologise for that. Videos should be coming out more frequently from now on, should being the operative word there, so thank you very much for your patience and we hope you enjoy. Plo Koon is arguably the second greatest military mind within the Jedi Order, with extensive experience as a strategic leader even before the outbreak of the Clone Wars, having led the Republic to a miraculous victory in the conflict known as the Stark Hyperspace War. With the opening of the Clone Wars, the Jedi were organised into military ranks within the Grand Army of the Republic, and Master Plo Koon was one of 10 given the rank of Jedi High General. Both on and off the battlefield, Koon is a capable strategist and tactician. He is able to stay focused on the needs of the moment without losing sight of larger objectives, a balance many of his contemporaries failed to achieve. Some view Koon's tendency to see moral issues in black and white as restrictive and foolish, But Koon sees that he has a deep enough understanding of right and wrong to know that most of the time, when people see grey areas, they're simply failing to tell the black from the white. This ease of distinction between issues carries over to Koon's combative tactics. He is capable of observing and understanding chaotic situations and making quick and effective decisions to best respond to them. This makes him one of the greatest field agents and generals of the Order, particularly when he is working in concert with allies. This tactical and team-oriented proclivity does not in any way detriment Plo Koon's individual skill. He is well known for his proficiency with a lightsaber, considered one of the best duelists of his era. Even Sith apprentice Darth Maul, renowned for his own skill and overwhelming arrogance, considered Koon a great warrior, wanting to test his skills against him in battle. Specialising in Form 5 of lightsaber combat, mastering both variants Gem So and Chien, Koon was a duelist that focused heavily on holding a strong defense and backing it up with a powerful counteroffensive, taking the form down its defensively focused path rather than its domineeringly offensive one. Form 5 was created in an attempt to bring union to, and thus perfect, the first three styles of lightsaber combat, with the primary goal being the addition of precise and powerful offensive capabilities to the otherwise perfect Form 3, Surisu. Chien applied this idea in the practice of blast deflection, with Gem So using the same approach for dueling. Alongside his mastery of Form 5, Koon dedicated himself to mastering Form 4, Ataru. This is likely to compensate for Form 5's lack of mobility, as Ataru wasn't included in the foundation of Form 5's technique. However, Plo's style does not appear to be drastically influenced by his experience with Ataru, it instead acting as an expansion for his knowledge base, the comprehension and understanding of its uses and applications better allowing him to effectively counter the more flamboyant and elaborate offensive used against him. In keeping with the MO of Form 5 specialists, Plo Koon's technique involved precise and deadly strikes with as much power behind them as possible. He optimised his precision by taking as much time with his movements as was practical, rarely if ever relying on the usual flurries of blade work employed by most lightsaber duelists, even compared to other Form 5 specialists. This is not to say that Koon couldn't move this fast when necessary, it is simply an expression of his tactical inclinations in combat. To use the words of Jedi Master Terra Sinube,
"The value of moving slowly is that one can always clearly see the way ahead."
Restraining his speed allowed Plo to always clearly see the best options available to him, and meant that no opening was missed. Every opportunity could and would be exploited, either with a well-placed saber strike or a powerful force push. Another benefit of the slow and steady approach was Koon's extreme energy efficiency. Whereas other users of Form 5 would continuously incorporate high-speed dedicated power strikes into their lightsaber sequences, in an attempt to overpower an opponent's strongest defences, Koon's approach was to save his strength for the weak link in the chain, employing no less strength in his attacks, but a much lower frequency between them, allowing him to conserve his energy and remain fresh in a fight, where others would tire themselves out. This tactic requires a strong defense to function, as one cannot wait for an opportunity to counter if they can't survive long enough to see one. Koon has been shown capably defending against dual blade wielding opponents, as well as double-bladed sabers. This proficiency against the more unorthodox weapons is not only a demonstration of extreme skill, but also evidence towards a stronger defense against the more basic and common threat of single-bladed opponents. Keeping this in mind, Koon's duel with Asajj Ventress, in which he is clearly controlling the fight and dominating his opponent, was performed with a broken arm. As one's options in combat are severely limited by the restriction of only using one hand, especially for power duelists like Koon, it is not unreasonable to assume his defense is much greater than the already impressive state it was shown in during this fight. I would even go so far as to say Koon's Form 5 defense is as close to as good as Kenobi's Form 3 one as can be, without falling into Surisu's purely defensive practice. This is somewhat loose speculation, but it is backed up by the fact that Koon's defences have only ever been shown to be breached by physical strikes, which is the only thing that ever routinely breaks through Kenobi's own near-perfect defence, disregarding force abilities for the moment. On the topic of physical strikes, Koon is known to be a master of unarmed combat, likely another attribute enhanced by his education in Ataru. The exact details regarding his hand-to-hand combat skills are unknown, but I believe it is more than likely that he practiced a personalised version of Teräs Käsi. Now this is pure speculation, but my reasoning lies in examining his close friendship with Micah Giat, and his subsequent training of Giat's Padawan, Boltar Swan. Gyat was a master of the Vadanayan sliding hands technique and taught it to his Padawan. Swan then took the technique and merged it with the Terraskazi arts she had learned under Anun Bondara. After Plo Koon took over Swan's training, he guided her in blending her already impressive skills with a powerful lightsaber defense, refocusing her attention to the development of her swordsmanship. I do not believe it possible for a master of Plo Koon's caliber to not learn at least some of his Padawan's impressive technique during their time spent together, and his referenced skill in unarmed combat leans me towards his more than likely mastery of it. Even if my analysis is entirely incorrect, his proficiency in close combat is irrefutable, and is a major factor to consider for this particular matchup. As noted by Jen Sarai, it is true he has not been shown using unarmed techniques in the lightsaber duels we've seen him in, but he had a broken arm in one and was up against a veritable muscle tank in the other, so it makes sense to me that he wouldn't use them. But wait, you cry! Obi-Wan defeated Opress with a kick! Yes, this is true, but he was engaged in a blade lock up against a wall, where he was perfectly placed to take a safe and effective leg shot. Not to mention he was using two sabers throughout that fight, giving him a bit more protection against lethal counterattacks. I also feel that, overall, Plo was a swordsman at heart, his skills in unarmed combat simply taking a back seat to his preference for dueling. Something Plo definitely did incorporate into his sequences often were his force abilities, using powerful pushes and shoves to throw his opponents around and off-balance their offenses, often directly affecting the outcome of his fights with such tactics. Plo Koon's advanced lightsaber technique and martial prowess, coupled with his combative mentality and tactical ingenuity, made for an incredibly powerful skill set. He seems to hold off all but the most brutally unconventional assaults with ease, even when at a massive disadvantage, and his retaliative offense is powerful and precise, allowing him to break an opponent with minimal expense of energy. He has no problem handling single or multiple opponents and can take and keep control of almost any situation. And in the rare case that he can't, his diverse range of options allow him to weather all but the strongest of storms. Shaak Ti is an accomplished military general in her own right, and proved this early into the Clone Wars. She was another one of the 10 Jedi given the rank of Jedi High General, and led many fronts to victory throughout the conflict. Given that Ti was handed responsibility for the defense of Kamino throughout the war, protection of the Chancellor during the Battle of Coruscant, and later the Jedi Temple itself upon the war's nearing conclusion, I believe it is fair to assume that she is most notable and proven for her skills in strategic defense. I feel this theory is also backed up by the fact that in most, if not all of her fights, Shaak Ti remains on the defensive. Granted, in both her duels with Grievous, she is either backed into an inescapable situation, or defending the Chancellor. But in her defense of Kamino and even her duel with Galen Marek, Ti's first response was to wait for her opponents to come to her. Even with the case of her defending the Chancellor, there was a point in the marathon fight where Ti would have been best served dispatching her opponents as fast as possible with a powerful offense, so that she could get back to protecting him. But instead, she relied on counters. Shaak Ti's reputation as one of the greatest swordmasters of the era is well earned. She is one of 3 of the original survivors of General Grievous, and though her first engagement with him ended with her near death, the second had her outmaneuvering, deceiving, and even meeting his assault head-on, each with varying degrees of success. She also engaged Darth Vader's secret apprentice, Galen Marek, and displayed an impressive array of abilities both with the lightsaber and the Force. Ti has completely mastered both Form 2, Makashi, a dueling-centric style created to optimize a user's combative ability in close combat, and Form 4, Ataru, a highly acrobatic style geared towards overwhelming opponents with erratic but elegant assaults. Makashi is extremely precise and efficient in its movements, and masters of the style enjoy huge advantages over all but the best duelists, due to the style's superior focus on lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat in comparison to most other forms. It employs concise blade work with a heavy focus on thrusts and quick, shallow cuts. Ataru, on the other hand, is an energy-intensive form that involves a lot of movement and agility. High-speed slashes, swipes and spins are the bread and butter of this form, adding to the frequency and unpredictability of a user's attacks. Shaak Ti blends these two styles together to create a lethal partnership of wild speed and agility with focused and deadly precision. She has also demonstrated her skill with the more obscure weapon, the Electro Staff, masterfully wielding it against Grievous Magna Guards. Similarly evidenced in this fight, as well as from accounts of her defense of the Jedi Temple, was T's skill with Jarkai dual weapon fencing. This proficiency may well come into play in this fight, as spare weapons could become available should any combatant fall before her. Even if this turns out not to be the case, her knowledge and skill in this area is not to be underestimated, as it points to a larger knowledge base and diversity of experience. While her typical rule of engagement appears extremely defensive in nature, T's response once she has been engaged is in no way limited by this approach. Oddly for one of her chosen styles, Shaak T seems to physically duel with this same defensive mentality, though she does this in an entirely different manner, using the flamboyant and energetic technique of Ataru to outmaneuver any of her opponent's advances and pierce their lowered defences with the deft thrusts and controlled sweeps of Makashi. An opponent attacks, she redirects or evades the attack, and strikes back with a veritable barrage of slashes and thrusts. T's intensity was insane, and she rarely held back when on the offensive, giving her assaults everything she had in speed, agility and strength. Duelists with this sort of approach to offense were typically singular in their focus, often at the expense of situational awareness. This is not the case with T, however, who almost ceaselessly displays her tactical awareness in her fights, using distractions to bait an opponent and allow for perfectly timed force pushes, manoeuvring groups of opponents into positions that limit their advantage of numbers, and manipulating her environment to her favour. Despite having this powerful and overwhelming offensive potential at her disposal, T rarely employs such an approach for extended periods, instead conserving her energy and unleashing it in sporadic bursts. This tactic has manifested itself within her defensive setups, and is likely the reason T can so dependently rely on such a staggered approach. She prepares for an assault, she is engaged by her opponent, she overwhelms or outmaneuvers them, capitalizes on this, falls back, then repeats. These breaks in combat compensate for her energy inefficient offense, allowing her to continue fighting for a much longer time than if she went all out continuously, as some of her contemporaries attempt to do. As well as being beneficial for energy conservation, this staggered method allows T to evaluate her opponents and determine what she needs to do to defeat them. In the rare situation that she is uncertain, she can use the time manoeuvring away to either take an environmental advantage, retreat, or fall back on her force abilities. In regards to defense, Shaak T was just as strong, against single opponents and, particularly, groups. This is especially impressive as it means that she compensated for both the primary weaknesses of her chosen forms, the flawed economy of movement in Ataru and the deflection-limited Makashi. T has fought an entire army of Magna Guards single-handedly, displaying just how effective her defense could be. She used her elite skill and tactical brilliance to evade and counter them, and when this option ran dry, she unleashed her offensive assault, taking a Magna Guard's own Electro Staff after using his body as a shield, and destroying many of the droids. She also duelled Darth Vader himself in defense of the Jedi Temple, fleeing the fight but not before buying enough time for some survivors to escape. Holding off Vader for even a short while is an impressive feat indeed. However, T's defense is not impregnable. Though her parries and blocks are strong, her preferred response is to dodge attacks, not take them head on, instead relying on her superior maneuverability. When this is not an option, T visibly struggles to hold out for long, and is prone to mild panic. I will note, however, that this was only shown to be the case in her first fight against Grievous, where she was up against one of the most dangerous killers to date in a seemingly hopeless situation while fatigued from extended battle. Even a Jedi Master has limits. In her fight with the Magna Guards, T also displayed a lethal proficiency for unarmed combat, parrying the blows of 3 of the droids with her bare hands, and using force-enhanced speed to decapitate another with her knee. As briefly touched upon, T is not opposed to using her force abilities to their fullest, routinely incorporating them into her lightsaber sequences. Her timing, precision, and power with such attacks are devastating, and she uses them for offense and defense, both subtly and bluntly. Shaak T's martial skill is partnered perfectly with her tactical ingenuity, and all facets of her approach to combat are unpredictable, powerful, and diverse. When her more blunt and conventional methods have failed her, T has shown incredible subtlety in her responses. She is also extraordinarily skilled at multitasking. shown through her manipulation of the Greater Sarlacc within the ancient abyss of Felucia, as well as some Force-sensitive natives during her duel with Galen Marek. She can defend against a ridiculous number of opponents, outmaneuvering them and countering with deadly results, and when she switches to offense, she can overwhelm almost any foe.
Count Dooku is a brilliant strategic mind. He personally manipulated many events of the Clone Wars, pulling strings and misdirecting the Republic, even the Separatists themselves, to further the cause of his master plan. He is a competent tactician, but the majority of his time and effort regarding strategy is spent on the manipulation of events off the battlefield. He is less a military genius and more a political creature when all is said and done, a result of his personal interest as opposed to any lack of skill. This relative lack of battlefield leadership counts for nothing when one examines Dooku's tactical application in dueling, however. He knows exactly how to handle an opponent, leading them by the nose to wherever the environment serves him best, using Dun Mach to attack them psychologically and maximizing on their weakness as soon as they're presented. Few can match his calculated cunning. Dooku's dueling skills were unmatched by all but Masters Yoda and Windu, as well as the Dark Lord of the Sith, Sidious. This by itself tells you all you need to know about how dangerous his dueling skill was. The Count is the complete and most comprehensive master of Form 2 Makashi, the dueling-centric style that was built solely for lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat. Unlike Shaak Ti, he specializes in Makashi alone, believing that mastering multiple forms limits how far one can develop as a duelist. This sole specialization is usually a crippling weakness, but Dooku compensates for it by enhancing his style with certain aspects of other forms, retooling them for his use within the refines of Makashi's tight movesets. For instance, he has no issues with group engagement and blast deflection, taking some of the defensive techniques of Shirisu and Shien and feeding them into his Form 2 parry movements. It is our belief that he also mixes the Ataru Sumo rotations and the Juyo spin kicks, melding the distinctly separate techniques into one to allow for more precise evasive acrobatics. Generally speaking, Dooku dislikes using acrobatics in dueling, considering it wasteful, yet, in his penultimate duel with Kenobi and Skywalker, he employed it multiple times, combining Ataru's acrobatics with Juyo's leg spins. Remaining on the ground as much as possible was essential for Dooku, as the Makashi style relies heavily on controlled footwork to function. On top of his specific enhancements to the second style, Dooku has a working knowledge of all different forms, as evidenced in his training with General Grievous. In short, he has mastered Makashi to a level beyond any of his time and avoided its drawbacks. Dooku's approach to dueling was very flexible and tuned to the situation at hand, far from the staid approaches of Plo and T. However, in this particular duel, it would count for little, as his response to duelists of their caliber has always been the same. He won't give ground in a fallback defense, but he won't drive hard on the offense either. He is very much a fencing duelist. Parry, counter, stab, and step. Rinse and repeat. He doesn't attack and stagger an opponent with crazy assaults, like a Juyo specialist. Instead, he engages with speed and precision, relying on redirection and evasion to steadily step around his foes and fence them until they sloppily let him pass their guards. On the topic of getting past guards, this is the spear tip of Dooku's offensive capabilities. He uses pinpoint precision backed up with blinding speed to work his blade around the sabers of his opponents and score minor hits, finishing them off properly as they fall. All his offensive efforts go towards working around his opponent's defenses, not breaking through them, and this goes for all his combative abilities. His skill in this method of combat is unparalleled. Solely brute force users have no chance, and speed-reliant duelists similarly have no hope. The only way to stand against Dooku for any length of time is to have precision. His reliance on this workaround mentality leans on Dooku's defensive capabilities as well. He uses deliberate blade spins to catch his opponent's saber and direct it out of harm's way, often using these redirections to close in swiftly to cut past their lower defenses, much like a Jimso specialist. While impressive in application, this constant fencing hybrid of offense and defense leaves Dooku weak against unrelenting assaults from enemies that can match, or at least nearly match, his levels of technical sophistication and skill. He is completely incapable of stonewalling the most masterful duelists, relying on his flowing push and pull approach to keep them off balance, using evasive footwork and pivots to sidestep power blows. Now, this does not imply that his defense is lacking, far from it. We are simply explaining how he applies himself defensively. In almost all his duels, this method completely outclasses anything his opponents can throw at him, again largely thanks to his finesse of the Makashi practice. For a clear example of how far his levels of defense were, see his sparring matches against General Grievous. Though it was difficult to exploit Dooku's defense, it was not impossible. He has been overwhelmed on several occasions, opting to retreat instead of standing his guard, especially due to the fact that he was somewhat hampered by his age, which limited his combative longevity. The Count's unarmed skills are incredibly advanced, and he heavily incorporates them into his lightsaber sequences, using them as his go-to response for duelists he cannot or doesn't have time to outfence. As his use with the saber, Dooku's use of physical strikes are swift and precise, hitting his opponents exactly where he needs to, compensating for his lack of strength with force augmentation. A favorite example of ours is his kick and follow-up body slam of Obi-Wan Kenobi in his 2v1 duel against him and Skywalker. Alongside this excellent use of physical attacks is Dooku's most powerful weapon, his application of the Force. One of his greatest weaknesses is his lacking stamina. He has on multiple occasions been forced onto his back foot by sheer exhaustion. Whenever this happens, he quickly resorts to his powerful command of the Force. Force throws, pushes, pulls, and of course, lightning are all commonly used by Dooku to dominate the battlefield, and he uses his abilities with the same tactical precision and finesse as with his dueling. He is, of course, a force to be reckoned with. Darth Maul is a cunning and perceptive warrior, something to be expected from someone trained since childhood. He is relatively experienced in battlefield strategy, never having led an army, but he was capable of commanding Death Watch in a battle against General Grievous. If nothing else, he has proven himself able to hold the loyalty of the radical Mandalorians without them leaving him. If they will follow him, even if he's the strongest, then he must have some accomplishment in leadership skills. Maul's entire life has been spent training to be the ultimate warrior assassin. It makes sense then that his tactical mindset is a strong one. Maul excels in his pre-battle preparation and his moment-to-moment decision-making. He is no tactical genius, but he has a complete understanding of combat and how to handle an opponent. He analyzes his foe before battle, works out the best way to take them down, and keeps his approach flexible. He also makes good use of his environment, as well as the Sith Dumatch tactic of psychologically tormenting opponents. Maul is a great combatant, the poster boy for the Juyo style and an absolute master of Teräs Käsi. Juyo, the seventh form of lightsaber combat, is the most aggressive of all lightsaber forms. It plays to the idea of a good offense being the best defense. Its physical movements solely focus on hacking an opponent to pieces. It is an extremely demanding form, both physically and mentally, requiring a great deal of passion and energy from the user. But more importantly, it needs an immense amount of self-discipline. A Juyo user without self-control will lose themselves to the aggressive nature of the style, and fall too far into their fighting fury, devolving into little more than a rabid beast. Powerful, yes, but weak-minded. Maul gains his strength from just riding this fine line between warrior and beast, drawing on the power of the wild aggression, but tempering it with calculated control. For a duelist to master Juyo, it is recommended that they first get a handle on at least 3 other forms. I believe Maul skipped the third, learning only the Niman and Ataru forms as a supplement to Juyo, relying on his immense skill in Teräs Käsi for the third supplement. He has displayed impressive skill in Ataru, but appears to use it solely for acrobatic enhancement instead of the lightsaber sequences themselves. His skill in Iman's Jarkai variant is also advanced, as shown by his use of dual sabers throughout the Clone Wars. As one might imagine, Maul's offensive power is extremely potent. He is an unrelenting whirlwind of saber slashes and physical strikes, moving at extremely high speeds and raining hammer blows down on his enemy's defenses. Not many duelists can stand against his barrage. He is unpredictable and precise with his attacks, taking particular advantage of the unfamiliarity most opponents have of his favorite weapon, the saber staff. Most of Maul's movements revolve around spinning his body, throwing as much of his incredible strength into the movements as possible, bolstering his power within the resulting momentum. He swings his saber in sync with his body, giving him numerous offensive advantages. Firstly, it partners his exceptional strength and speed together perfectly, allowing him to use power attacks without slowing his movements, a feat particularly difficult for duelists with Maul's weapon type. Secondly, the full body movement makes it easier to incorporate physical strikes into his sequences, particularly spin kicks. Finally, dedicating his full body movement in his attacks fuels his commitment to each motion, driving his passion and adrenaline to the limits, bringing him closer to the core power of the dark side. The furious and lethal offense is extremely potent, and an opponent pressed by a Juyo offense is going to have a difficult time countering. However, if Maul fails to break an opponent's defense and they are able to either outmaneuver or break through his relentless offense, he is left wide open with a lacking defense. This is not a jab on Maul's defensive skill. After all, he has proven himself capable of defending against two high-level Ataru specialists. But regardless of his talented blade work, the application of a Juyo offense inherently lowers one's defensive capabilities. Maul is no exception to that rule. Even disregarding the style's mechanics, Maul has demonstrated his lacking defense on multiple occasions. He failed to defend himself against the pirate Hondo, he took a number of embarrassing hits in his duel against Pre Vizsla, and let us not forget how his first meeting with Kenobi ended. However, the latter two examples may have explanations. Against Pre Vizsla, it seems that Maul was not using any of his force abilities, wanting to beat Vizsla with his pure and natural skill. I believe this is so because Maul never makes use of the force in the duel, not a force push, nor a force jump. With this in mind, I would say this also extended to his force augmentation. That being said, he did evade several devastating attacks due to his use of Teräs Käsi, particularly his evasion of Vizsla's flamethrower. And of course, his defensive lapse against Kenobi had more to do with his arrogance than any lack of skill. To illustrate the height of his defensive capabilities, I would turn to his fights against General Grievous and Darth Sidious. We know that Grievous could overwhelm most of his Jedi opponents through sheer speed and unorthodox dueling methods. Yet, Maul was able to defend against Grievous's assault, eventually throwing him away with a force push. Against Darth Sidious, someone we know who is capable of speed blitzing 3 Jedi Masters, too fast to be initially seen by even Mace Windu, Maul could fight as his equal, even for a short exchange. It is my opinion that Sidious was fighting Maul in that short instance to his fullest capabilities, giving Maul an astounding feat to his offense and defense. Maul's hand-to-hand combat skill is perhaps his most significant attribute. He is an absolute master of Teräs Käsi, the martial art created to allow non-force sensitives to stand against Jedi in combat. Maul perfectly melded his mastery of the technique with his lightsaber skills, enhancing the already immense offense of Juyo. He used physical strikes to add to his unpredictable attack sequences, sometimes striking with saber and body at the same time. By the time of the Clone Wars, Maul was completely capable of incorporating force abilities into his lightsaber sequences, using powerful waves and pushes. Much like Dooku, he could ragdoll Obi-Wan Kenobi at his will. When surrounded, he could throw a powerful force wave around himself. Darth Maul's physical presence in combat is second to none. He is a martial hurricane of speed and power. What he lacks in grace, he makes up for with sheer dominance. Though he has lapses in his defense, he is skilled at manipulating an opponent and has a fair awareness of his surroundings, more than capable against single opponents and groups. Maul is one combatant you don't want to run into unprepared.
For each section of this 2v2 matchup, we will be giving verdicts for individual ability as well as overall team performance. As individuals, these combatants are easily placed. Dooku naturally takes the top spot thanks to his extreme swordsmanship, but contrary to popular opinion, he is not by far and away the most combatively viable overall. He definitely has a distinct edge, but Plo and T both bring a completely balanced skill set to the table as well. Each of their skills only marginally inferior to Dooku's own, and both have advantages over him to help even the odds somewhat. There is too little distinction between the two Jedi to separate them, however. We place them on par in every aspect of their dueling and tactical prowess. Maul comes last in this category, but only by a slight margin. He is the most adept of all in unarmed combat, and immensely powerful offensively with his dueling skills, but his comparatively basic tactical ingenuity, disinclination to use force powers, and lackluster defense brings his overall ranking down significantly. Forming a conclusion on the team front is more complex. Looking at the balance of individual skill, it appears that the two teams are equally matched, with Maul's inferiority counterbalancing Dooku's superiority. However, the tactical approach of each duelist is what sets the two teams apart. Plo and T employ near identical approaches to dueling. They both stay very much on the defensive. They're also both tactical geniuses, and know that they're going to have difficulty dealing with their opponents separately. They're going to keep this a 2v2, not two 1v1s. Dooku and Maul are going to have to go on the offensive against the Jedi, and they are completely incompatible in their approaches. Dooku relies on a back and forth fencing style, while Maul is an all-out offensive hurricane. No matter how they slant this fight, they're either going to be holding back or getting in each other's way. Even disregarding each team's tactical approaches, the two Jedi are old friends. Both are very familiar with one another's strengths, weaknesses, and combat preferences. The Sith, on the other hand, hate each other, even beyond the usual Sith animosity. Dooku despises Maul for killing his old Padawan, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Maul considers Dooku a Sith pretender, furious that he was replaced by an ex-Jedi of all people. We are assuming for this fight that the two would begrudgingly team up for this duel, but begrudgingly is as good as it's going to get with them, and the impact that will have on their teamwork cannot be overstated. And so, Plo Koon and Shaak T get the team edge. As a member of the Keldor species, Plo Koon was naturally granted greater than average reflexes and endurance, average being the peak human level of these traits, and was noted for his physical strength. Natural resilience to environmental extremes is also common to a Keldor, and Koon has taken full advantage of this fact. Keldor constitution, however, is weaker than that of humans, and has caused Koon severe issues in the past. This factor worsened by his advanced age. Despite his advanced years, Koon remains incredibly fit, and has survived extended periods on the battlefield without tiring. He is also quite nimble for such a grounded duelist, capable of incredible feats of acrobatics with the aid of the Force. Koon's mentally oriented abilities through the Force are naturally bolstered by his species' sensory glands that grant even non-Force sensitives among his kind basic telepathy, and have allowed him to fine-tune his mental Force skills to a level typically unattainable by most of his contemporaries. This is particularly useful to him when acting in consort with other Keldor, even more so with those he has a bond with, such as his niece. Keldor physiology also burdens Koon with a serious disadvantage, in the form of his anti-ox breathing mask, which he needs to breathe in oxygen-rich environments due to his species' evolution in Dorian's helium-intensive atmosphere. This weakness almost resulted in Koon's death when Savage Opress managed to rip his mask from his face during their duel, after Plo became distracted trying to warn an ally of an unfortunately fatal mistake. Shaak T is a Togruta, and enjoys many advantages over her contemporaries as a result of this. Togrutans are naturally more resilient than humans, which, backed up by her Force enhancement, makes Shaak T not quite a tank alongside the likes of Malgus or Vader, but definitely an armoured truck like Kenobi when it comes to taking physical punishment. She has survived being buried alive beneath rubble, has worked through a laser shot to the abdomen, and has repeatedly shrugged off electrical shocks to the wrists and hands by electrostaffs. On top of this physical hardiness, a Togrutan's montrals allow for a passive form of echolocation. This gives T a heightened awareness of her surroundings that, enhanced by a Force sensitivity, effectively gives her a sphere of vision around her. The extent of this sight's clarity is dubious, but I'm inclined to believe it is more than clear enough for combative application, as it would further explain T's effectiveness in group engagements and splitting her awareness for multitasking. In terms of weaknesses, her lengthy leku and tall montrals present large targets for her opponents, but T has never been seen suffering from this weakness, and it is unlikely that the loss of these extremities would be fatal. Shaak is also in extremely good shape, granting her phenomenal levels of stamina and speed far exceeding that of a human, even before taking into account force enhancement.
Count Dooku is human, who are attributed with adaptability and resilience. He is extremely fit for a man of his age, as noted by Yoda, but unfortunately, Father Time tends to catch up to him. His combative longevity is crippled by his flagging stamina, his speed and strength almost solely reliant on force augmentation, and his constitution is relatively weak. He cannot hold up an intense lightsaber duel for long stretches of time. Having said that, he is no helpless old man. This is still the guy that can throw Obi-Wan Kenobi around with one arm, the same man who took on 3 Dathomirian assassins in his pajamas, the same man who could fight Yoda on equal terms. His physical handicaps are more than made up for by his force valor, and the only real weakness he suffers from is his stamina and his endurance. Though in most cases, Dooku did not need much time to defeat his opponents. His achievements in speed were astounding, contending with the speed of Yoda, outpacing and outmaneuvering Obi-Wan and Anakin on several occasions, and thriving against General Grievous. He was even able to outrace Quinlan Vos, a Jedi Master half his age, who used superhuman speed to escape Dooku. Physically, Dooku was an old man, far past his prime as a human male, but his astounding use of the dark side would augment his extraordinary speed and agility. Darth Maul is a Dathomirian, which affords him an intense tolerance for pain and a level of natural, physical fitness well beyond that of a human. He also has a set of horns atop his head that can be used as an additional weapon if necessary. Beyond that though, and by far his greatest attribute, is the pure level of physical power Maul has attained through an entire life's worth of combat conditioning. We think it is fair to say that he has attained the highest physicality possible for any humanoid, capable of feats beyond even some Force users' augmentation, with his personal strength alone. He once snapped the spine of a Rodian with a single elbow strike, without the aid of the Force. His sheer destructive potential without the Force is insane, so you can imagine just how dangerous this Sith is with the full power of the dark side flowing through him. He does have one issue though. Thanks to his overwhelming arrogance when facing a young Obi-Wan Kenobi, Maul let down his guard and was cut in half by the Padawan, leaving him bodiless from the waist down. While many years of resulting insanity and isolation have apparently left no mark on Maul's physical and mental health, after a bit of Night Sister intervention anyway, his lower half is now entirely cybernetic. His cybernetic legs seem to be highly advanced and afford him the same maneuverability as his natural ones did. His cybernetics have their advantages and disadvantages. For starters, his legs are much more durable, capable of taking more damage. They can also do more damage, thanks to their solid metal frame. On the flip side, metal is far more conductive of electricity than flesh. And while the prosthetics seem resistant to short-circuiting, his weakness to electrical attacks is almost certainly raised. As it is unconfirmed whether or not Maul has any feeling in his legs, we are going to assume that he has, as it is unlikely that he would have control over the prosthetic movement without at least some nerve substitute. However, Maul's extensive use of Teras Kasi, particularly his ability to anticipate a Force user's attacks, could offset his crippling new weakness. This section is more challenging in the individual department. It is fairly obvious that Maul takes the physical edge for pure physical power, but where T is below him in strength, her speed, flexibility, agility, and stamina are very much on par. Though her constitution was strong, it still did not match Maul. But let's not forget that her Togrutan Montral echolocation, which is an invaluable asset, allows her to observe the full battle without having to take her focus off the immediate sightline. It is true that Maul has his horns, but these are fairly insignificant against the opponents of this caliber. We feel that these two different assets balance out well. Maul's superior strength made up for by T with her spatial awareness advantage. We believe that Plo follows after the two, with his physical strength putting him over Dooku's own physicality. Dooku has demonstrated greater speed and agility than Plo, but not without heavy use of force augmentation. Granted, Plo does have his mass as a weakness, but this weakness has only been ever exploited once before. Neither Dooku nor Maul are going to be ripping off his mask without losing an arm in the process. After all, Shaak Ti would have Plo's back. As for the team verdict, it would be somewhat of a draw. Though Dooku is age, it took the likes of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker to tire him out. Yoda would describe Dooku as being more fit than men half his age, and his use of the dark side bolstered his physicality. Maul is immensely powerful on the physical front, but he is very closely followed by Ti. As for Plo, he is not particularly impressive here. He's relatively strong, sturdy, and agile, but not anything to write home about. But he brings enough to Ti to contend with Dooku and Maul on equal terms.
As a lifelong member of the Jedi High Council, it is hardly surprising that Plo Koon is one of the most powerful Force wielders of his era. Unlike some of his contemporaries, however, his notability with his use of the Force is primarily due to his variety and not his magnitude. Plo has a plethora of skills that stem from his advanced knowledge of science. He is able to alter the physical state of small objects and effect change to the environment around him. He is also a skilled user of Malacia, a technique that alters the equilibrium of a target and incapacitates them. He was also extremely advanced in his use of telepathy, and was able to probe the mind of Aiko Stark from a great distance without revealing his intrusion. Even more notable is the fact that he did this while in communication with the Jedi Council on the other side of the galaxy, seemingly without strain. While this is an impressive feat few could match, the latter half of this example was only possible due to his bond with his niece, Shaak, and was also likely bolstered by their shared Keldor heritage. Nonetheless, this is a clear demonstration of Koon's mental capabilities. Plo also spent time with his own people, training with the Barando sages of Doran, where he learnt and mastered the Anya Sef technique, which allows the user to safeguard against mental intrusion, further adding to his repertoire. Plo backed up this extensive set of uncommon skills with the more run-of-the-mill abilities used by most Jedi, though the manner in which he applied these techniques in combat differed greatly. For example, while fully capable of boosting his speed, strength and stamina to the superhuman levels common among the Jedi, in fact a master of the technique, Koon held back on this power far more than his contemporaries, applying it in short bursts and only when necessary, in keeping with his preferred approach to combat, slow and steady but well-timed and powerful. In regards to telekinesis, Plo was considered a savant alongside the likes of Dooku, again choosing to apply this skill with cunning and control rather than overwhelming power. Where powerhouses like Anakin Skywalker would blast an opponent with a wave of telekinetic energy, pushing them out of his reach, Plo would use lighter shoves to off-balance them or manipulate objects to distract them, before closing the distance to finish them with his lightsaber. This restraint is not to be mistaken for unwillingness, however. As in all things, Plo is a practical and pragmatic individual. He has used such powerful attacks and has even penetrated the force shields used to defend against such methods, a notable feat even among Jedi Masters. He will use all tools at his disposal to strike out at injustice, and the Force is no exception, but he does so with calm and control. Plo Koon uses the Force as a sharpened sword, not a blunt hammer. He is the embodiment of balanced justice, not overzealous revenge. With that in mind, we come to Plo's most infamous Force ability, Electric Judgment. Plo discovered this ability during an investigation that led to a small child being held hostage by the criminal Pommel. To temporarily disable Pommel before he could harm the child, Plo instinctively used the ability. When questioned by the council as to whether or not he thought his decision right, Plo pointed out that it saved the child and that he had remained completely in control of his emotions, acting on what was right and necessary, not fear, anger or desperation. The council asked if he would use the power again, and he replied that it would be irresponsible not to develop such a useful combative ability. While typically used to incapacitate, Electric Judgment does have the capacity to kill, and is a powerful weapon in Koon's arsenal. As a long-term member of the Jedi High Council, Shaak Ti is also one of the most powerful Force wielders of her era. In contrast to Master Plo, she is an example of a Jedi noted for the magnitude of her Force abilities, and not the range. She compensates for her relatively limited array of abilities, by taking what skills she does have to their highest potency. T is a paragon for force augmentation of physical abilities. She has taken her already impressive levels of speed and stamina and enhanced them to the point that she can continue a marathon lightsaber duel while constantly on the move for nearly 15 minutes, requiring only brief respites to regather her energy, as demonstrated in her second confrontation with Grievous, where she was going all out almost the entire time and only began to suffer from her exhaustion after her excessive and intense application of force speed. T's telepathic abilities are also extremely advanced, aided by her proclivity for multitasking. She was able to mentally tame the greater Sarlacc within Felucia's ancient abyss, simultaneously influencing the force-sensitive natives of the planet, while dueling Galen Marek, using both her extremely intensive lightsaber style as well as her overwhelmingly powerful force pushes. To maintain such extreme control over such powerful and numerous forces without suffering more strain than T displayed is exceptional. As if this wasn't evidence enough of her power in the Force, over the many years she spent hiding on Felucia, T managed to influence the very force state of the planet itself, and when she was defeated, the planet almost immediately fell to the corruption of the dark side. Shaak's aptitude for telekinesis is devastating. She is able to hurl large objects at high speeds with apparent ease, and her force pushes are capable of blasting solid objects into craters. When she focuses more on control and less on power, she is able to expertly manipulate objects, making use of this talent to manipulate her saber in the fight with the Magna Guards, and in a demonstration of cunning subtlety, tied Grievous' cape to a departing Maglev bullet train. T is also capable of breaking through the force shields of opponents, and has little difficulty throwing around even the most powerful force sensitives. She makes full use of her skill in telekinesis with the talent for and willingness to incorporate such attacks into her lightsaber sequences, doing so with practiced ease. Shaak is also capable of rudimentary force deflection, formerly known as Tutu Minus, using this ability in her first fight against Grievous. Though unable to neutralize the kinetic energy and thus sent flying, T's basic proficiency for the technique saved her life, and it is a notable last-ditch defense. On top of this, she was also capable of energy-based offensives similar in nature to Kinetite. However, she has only been shown using such abilities on Felucia, where the ambient life energy of the jungle planet would undoubtedly reduce the amount of personal energy required to use them. As this ambient energy would not be available in a neutral arena, this ability will not come into play, but it is another clear demonstration of T's strength in and skill with the Force.
Count Dooku was one of the most respected Force wielders of the Jedi Order, and his power was only increased since becoming Darth Tyranus. He is known for the power and precision of his skill, but he has also demonstrated a high level of variety since turning to the dark side. He has a powerful connection and understanding of the Force, but unlike his Jedi colleagues, leans towards its control more than its passive use. To Dooku, it is a tool to be used, not a force to be influenced. The Count has a whole range of skills at his disposal, each taken to heights well beyond what most can attain. In the words of Jocasta Nu, his knowledge of the Force was unique. Among his most unique powers were his beast control abilities, powerful enough to allow him to dominate the mind of a Krayt dragon. He could also resist poisons, staving off a deadly disease and resisting Night Sister poisons. His Quay-Tech meditation technique would be another unique ability he would use to mask his Force signature to others. Dooku is an absolute master with the most mundane Force abilities, capable of augmenting his body to levels past the limits of the average human in their prime, countering the majority of the issues his immense age causes him. Unfortunately, as previously mentioned, not much can be done for his stamina, as the use of the augmentation is extremely strenuous in and of itself. He has a powerful grasp of telepathy for a human, having no trouble with the standard Jedi mind tricks, and even learning how to rip information from a target forcibly after turning to the Sith. It is in his telekinetic abilities that Dooku's true talents show. As a Jedi, he was considered a telekinetic prodigy, unrivaled by any of his peers and able to match the greatest masters. He even gave lectures on Force manipulation, advising his peers and the younger generation on the ebb and flow of the Force, and how one can control it. One of the more distinctive features of his prowess was his ability to manipulate objects without physical movement as a trigger. Where most Force users required hand gestures or a line of sight to focus and reach out with the Force, scholars like Dooku could rely solely on their mental control. It should be noted that the additional time and effort required to achieve this is inefficient, as physical action helps to consciously trigger abilities far more swiftly and with much greater results, particularly for Darksiders, who rely on their more physical instincts. Nevertheless, Dooku makes great use of his ability, throwing objects at his opponents while still attacking with his lightsaber. He can even break through the Force defenses of all but the most powerful Jedi with ease, and has done so to overwhelm many of his opponents. While he enjoys hurling his opponents around and overwhelming them with telekinetic barrages, Dooku's greatest power is his Force lightning. He takes every opportunity he can to blast opponents with torrents of crackling energy, the ultimate demonstration of the dark side's power in his eyes. He is able to use the ability at will, with no more than a moment's concentration required to gather up his energies. Naturally, most opponents can use their lightsaber to deflect his attacks, but Dooku is a practiced hand at blasting enemies just when they lower their guard, and he will take every opportunity to do so in a fight. A single second of carelessness will be your end against this Dark Lord. Darth Maul is not known for his command over the Force. As we've already discussed, he is a fighter focused on the physical. However, he is still no pushover when it comes to its combative application. Having no interest in developing his skills has led to an extremely low level of variety, but in many ways, this helps Maul. He makes up his underdevelopment with his simplistic magnitude. Compared to the likes of Dooku and Koon, who are both able to lift many objects at once and manipulate them with strength, speed, and precision, Maul seems insignificant. But what he has that they lack is a more primal, animalistic approach, which gives him a more powerfully concentrated weapon. Essentially, Maul is the exact opposite of Dooku as a Force user. He is all about the hand gestures, the physical extension of his powers. We see him using the physical movements not only to extend an influence over the Force, but to create a Force representation of the movements themselves. If he needs to punch someone in the face, but they're too far away, he summons up a metaphorical fist. If he needs to pull a ship off a cliff, he reaches out and rips it down. It's a simple method, but a powerful one. He has proven on a number of occasions that he is more than capable of breaking through an opponent's Force defenses, though he has not yet proven himself against the highest level masters outside of Kenobi, who is notorious for having a weak Force shield. Maul is reasonably competent in the area of telepathy, but his offensive powers are of little note in this matchup, passable at best. His mental barriers are incredibly potent, however, his tenacity backing up his focused discipline to counter any mental attacks. This would extend to his Teräs Käsi teachings as well. One of his more obscure talents is his skill in Mechu Deru, a Force ability that allows its user to understand the complex workings of mechanics and circuitry. This doesn't have any combative applications for Maul, but it will no doubt prove immensely useful should he have any issues with his cybernetic legs at any point in the combat. His talent for Force augmentation is immense, only adding to the sheer terror of his physical presence. It's hard to tell where the augmentation starts and the natural ability ends, but what is very clear is that Maul's simple augmentation becomes a trigger to Force Rage. The Force Rage ability is a dark side amp. To activate the ability, the user has to give in to the dark side, drawing on the power of their base instincts and allowing the raw emotion to course through them, enhancing all of their physical abilities. This power is extremely potent, but can lead a user into disaster if not held in check. For someone like Maul, one of the most animalistic of all Sith, it is a double-edged sword. He is more than capable of channeling the dark side without losing composure. He is a master of Juyo after all. But even when carefully controlled, the rage not only enhances his strength, but exasperates his weaknesses. This round is another difficult one to call. Darth Tyranus is clearly the most advanced Force wielder of the four, with Plo Koon and Shaak Ti falling just behind him. Even with his technical superiority, everything he can throw at the two can at least be defended against. Maul is last in this category. He is powerful enough to throw some good hits at the Jedi, but he rarely relies on such methods, always preferring a physical victory. Even if he did fall back on his telekinetic power, he can't stand up to either master in this area. Considering the power level of each team, we'd have to give this edge to the Jedi. Dooku is without a doubt more powerful than either Plo and T, but both masters are more than capable of holding their own against him separately for a fair bit of time. Together, they could have no problem overpowering his abilities. Maul isn't going to be on the sidelines doing nothing, but neither of us believe that he brings enough to the table to counter two council members' force power and speed. It's a case of a 9 and a 6 not matching up against two 8s.
Plo Koon's lightsaber is of utilitarian design, similar in its simplicity to the sabers of other Jedi of the era. It is 11 inches long, enough to accommodate the two-handed grip critical for strength-oriented duelists like Plo, and has a ridged surface just below the emitter to improve its ergonomics. The control switches are placed on the lower half of the hilt, and directly beneath them is the rugged, conical radiator segment that is the main distinguishing feature of the hilt's aesthetic. The hilt is made of metal alloy and uses a single Adagan crystal as the focusing lens, originally producing the rare yellow gold blade, but later replaced by a more standard dark blue crystal. Shaak T's lightsaber is also of a simple utilitarian design. It is also 11 inches in length, and thus accommodates for a two-handed grip. However, T predominantly relies on single-handed use of her saber. This affords her the more precise and less restrictive movement and control required for her Makashi-inspired methods. That being said, she is no less experienced with two-handed use and can be seen switching to it for stronger blocks and strikes when needed. With the exception of the very slight curvature of the pommel and the protruding emitter guard, the hilt is essentially as basic as possible. It is made of metal alloys and uses a single Adagan crystal as the focusing lens, which produces a light blue blade.
Tyranus wields a curved hilted saber, classically crafted with the requirements of Makashi in mind. The curve of the hilt is angled to perfectly fit the palm of the hand, and affords Dooku a significant increase in blade control, key for the subtle and precise wrist movements of Form 2. The hilt features a short blade guard protruding from just above the emitter, preventing the Count from slicing his own fingers off. On rare occasions, Dooku alters his grip to the lower part of the pommel. This may seem like a minor change at first, but considering the precision of a lightsaber duel, particularly with Makashi specialists, the few inches of blade direction can make all the difference in the world. However, gripping the saber in this manner drastically decreases the advantage of leverage, and the weight of the blade will be far less controllable with this style of grip, giving reason to why Dooku never implemented this tactic. The saber also features dual face functionality, the button below the emitter making the blade longer or shorter. This feature provides Dooku with yet another option in combat, particularly against opponents where close quarter strikes are key. As a Jedi, Dooku used a standard blue crystal as the focusing lens of his saber, but replaced it with a synthetic red crystal upon his joining the Sith. A somewhat unusual decision, given that the replacement provided greater cutting power at the expense of maneuverability, not something that can be all that beneficial for a Makashi duelist. Maul's weapon is a double-sided saber or saber staff, designed with the traditional Zabrakian weapon, the Zabraka. The blade's hilt is much longer than the average saber, effectively two standard hilts conjoined at the pommels. The blades of both sabers are of standard size, the length of the connected hilts allowing for greater leverage for powerful hacks and slashes, and great reach for lunges and stabs. Unfortunately, due to the weapon's size, it was difficult to manipulate with both blades ignited, requiring the use of full body movement to effectively defend and attack an opponent. Not that this was an issue for Maul, of course, muscle monster that he is. The length of the hilts also provided opponents with an excellent target, and Maul suffered from this weakness against the onslaught of then Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi. While not a weakness in standard duels, the movements of the double-sided saber are also problematic for this 2v2 scenario, as Maul has to swing both blades around in wide, sweeping arcs to effectively use the weapon. This is not going to give much room for Dooku to maneuver, and as Dooku's maneuverability is entirely necessary for his success, Maul is going to be restricted should the Count get too close. Maul can, of course, choose to only ignite one blade, but the length of the hilt is still far more difficult to manipulate with any degree of precision, and presents just as large of a target to his opponents. The two hilts that make up the full length of the saber staff each contain two red synthetic crystals as the focusing lens, and both sabers can operate independently of the other provided that the damage causing the two to separate isn't too severe.
Another easy conclusion. Dooku's saber obviously provides the most options, is the most ergonomic, and the best designed with his personal style in mind. While he makes little use of the additional options provided by the saber, they are nevertheless available, and firmly place his weapon at the top of the list. Plo Koon and Shaak Ti's sabers are almost identical, but the tiniest of edges will be given to Plo's due to its greater effectiveness with pommel strikes. Maul's weapon provides the weakness of being a huge target at the best of times, especially against precision duelists on the level of Plo and T, but in this particular duel, it also has a high risk of getting in Dooku's way, something neither Sith can afford. We feel it is perfectly fair to place his weapon fourth, therefore, despite the options available to it over the Jedi's weapons. For the team conclusion, we believe that the Jedi once again have the advantage. All four duelists' weapons are exceptional for them individually, with Dooku's taking the edge. But unlike the Jedi, Dooku has to contend with the unwieldy weapon of Maul getting in his way, should they ever reach a point where they are fighting side by side. This massive weakness completely overrides any benefit Dooku may gain from his own weapon's superior craftsmanship, and as such, the Jedi get the edge in armament. And now, the verdict. Plo Koon, Shaak Ti, Darth Tyranus and Darth Maul each bring their own unique and powerful skill sets to this matchup. A fight between any combination of these duelists will be a long, drawn-out battle that would leave the victor battered and exhausted.
Count Dooku clearly stands above the rest as the superior overall combatant. Tactical, cunning, cruel, a master of the lightsaber few can match, and a unique perspective on the Force.
He is certainly powerful, but so are Masters Plo and Ti, each a force to be reckoned with in their own right. Tactical geniuses and paragons of defence, Plo with his stonewalling and Ti with her evasion. It is not the offences of these two that are to be feared, but their counter-offensives. No one is going to be hastily attacking either of them without fear of swift and overwhelming retaliation.
Last comes Maul, a martial hurricane of pure animalistic rage tempered and shaped into the ultimate warrior assassin. In a fight, he is a furious blur of movement, lashing out with a full offensive barrage until his enemies fall before him. As two teams, both have their merits. The partnership of Maul and Tyranus will be a terrifying sight to behold, the physical presence of the warrior eclipsed by the dark silhouette of the tyrant. They have the advantage in strength and power, but they will not be fighting as one, a seething hatred between the two severing any chance of real cooperation. Their lack of cooperation, coupled with their hatred of one another, will cripple their teamwork. But on top of that, their approaches to combat are completely incompatible. Dooku duels with the Makashi mentality of back and forth, offense, defense, stab, and parry. He weaves along with the ebb and flow of combat, subtly manipulating the fight to his advantage with each movement. Unfortunately, this isn't a method that's going to work with the offensive whirlwind that is Maul. He charges into combat and immediately kicks into full gear, throwing everything that he has at his enemies with a vengeance, while not reckless, still ferocious. And he's not going to be concerned with getting in Dooku's way.
The Sith's greatest weakness is the Jedi's greatest strength. Koon and Ti are old friends. They are more than familiar with each other's capabilities. What's more, their abilities make for the perfect combination. Both are entirely defensive duelists, each relying on their counter-offensives. Plo using strength and precision, Ti using speed and precision. They both operate with the same mindset, which, alongside their familiarity with one another and general mastery of strategy, will make their teamwork flawless in comparison to their opponents. Shaak's ability to watch over Plo without having to look at him, thanks to her Togrutan montrals, will also greatly enhance their coordination. Here's how we think this fight would roughly play out. Plo and Ti know they can't allow themselves to get separated, because neither can defeat Dooku on their own. They know that they are a much better partnership than their opponents. and let their combat styles perfectly mesh together. Plo would assume a defensive stance, ready to stonewall whoever attacks him first. T would then assume a mobile and evasive stance, anchored around Koon.
Neither Dooku nor Maul is going to trust one another not to stab the other in the back, so they're immediately at a disadvantage. After some snarling and cold stares, Maul would take a can't sit around forever attitude and take the offensive, charging the two masters. Dooku would no doubt flash that sinister smirk of his and move to back up Maul.
Plo would meet Maul's offense, holding his ground and using his near-perfect defense to launch his powerful counters, carefully warding Maul off but not pressing the attack. T would be spinning and leaping around Maul, backing Plo up and preparing for Dooku.
Dooku would step straight into the heated duel, using an intense burst of speed and precision, but would struggle to bring his skill advantage to bear, because Plo and T would be dancing Maul around to keep him between them and Dooku as much as possible. Dooku would get around this, of course, but wouldn't be able to break either Plo or T while they were working together and using Maul so effectively. Maul will be getting difficult to handle at this point, as he tends to get more dangerous the more frustrated he gets, wrapping it up a gear and putting the pressure on Plo.
T would start to push the offensive, using her fantastic talents for group fighting to spin between Maul and Dooku, bouncing off their guards but drawing some of their attention away from Koon. Dooku would be having none of this foolery, and would launch a blinding assault against the Degruta, leaving Plo to Maul for the time being.
The two fights will start to separate slightly here. Maul would be relentlessly attacking Koon and driving him onto his back foot. Dooku would deliberately take advantage of this, pushing T to her limits and forcing more acrobatic evasiveness out of her. Both Jedi would need to draw on their force abilities at this point.
Plo completely outstrips Maul in the force department. They are roughly equal in strength of power, but Plo has more precision, variety, and a greater inclination to use his abilities. Plo would really start to lose ground against Maul, thanks to his physical superiority more than anything else, and he'd resolve to send him flying with a force push. For evidence of how easily he can do this, see his fight against Asajj Ventress. Dooku would be seriously pressing T, obviously her superior in dueling skills. She'd be able to hold him off for some time though. She's much fitter and more agile. She'd be leaping around, dodging and spinning, making up for her lesser skill in Makashi with her physicality and comparative youth. Nevertheless, she knows she can't keep that up forever. She'd quickly fall back on her telekinetic prowess. It's at this point that we believe the fight would turn in the Jedi's favour. Dooku is superior in the force department to Plo and T, but Maul is outstripped by all three. It's the Jedi's working together that would give them the edge. It is a given that Plo and T are almost certainly going to try and throw their respective opponents at each other's.
Plo would likely fall back on his force abilities. I think it would be Maul that is sent flying Dooku's way. The Zabrak would rely on his physicality to get him through the hit, so it would be up to Dooku to dodge him, and of course, he would. He's an expert at keeping his environmental awareness up. The fight would then halt for a moment, T using Dooku's distraction to leap back to Plo and resume their defensive posture, regathering their energy as much as they can. This is when Maul and Dooku would start working together much better, very quickly. They know the danger of not doing so. We think at this point in the fight that things are going to take a turn for the worse for the Jedi. Both Sith would throw everything they had at the two, going full out and working together properly for the first time.
Maul and Dooku will attempt to surround the Jedi, to avoid getting caught up in each other's methods again, but Plo and T would keep moving around to keep the two in front of them, forcing them to stay relatively close. The Jedi Masters still remain on the defensive, waiting for the Sith Lords to make the first move. The longer they take to do so, the more energy the two can recover after all. More so than the original engagement, they'd be ready to throw force abilities into the mix too.
While Maul and Dooku charge, the Jedi release a powerful force push together. Maul gets sent flat on his ass. Dooku force jumps to avoid it, letting loose a blast of lightning as he leaps through the air. The Jedi block it, probably T with her saber. Maul immediately gets back up, obviously just brushing off the hit with ease.
Plo throws some electric judgment at Dooku, who blocks it with a lazy flick of his sabre. Realising that in his moment of arrogance, Shaak Ti streaked past and began hammering blows down on Maul at a blinding speed. As Dooku recognises this, he is immediately blade locked with a powerful strike from Plo, his wrists shuddering under the force of the strike, with no choice but to divert his attention to the Keldor. Things once again start to get hairy for the Jedi.
Plo is going to be struggling with Dooku. He'd have the initial advantage with his power strikes, but Dooku will recover almost instantly and starting to drive Plo on his back foot. Plo could hold him off for a while. He has a powerful defense and he applies his Jimso style with a Makashi-esque precision, but Dooku definitely has the upper hand. T and Maul would be going at full speed, T with the initial advantage of having him on the defensive, his weakest state. Maul would be enraged by this, and channel the fury of the dark side to rally under T's assault. The two would quickly equalize their advantages, Maul ferociously hacking and slashing at T, who with fluidity and grace, dodges and parries every attack, trying to see through the flurry of fatal blows to find the right moment to counter.
Here's how we think this stage would turn out. Plo and Dooku would be carefully fencing back and forth for a fairly long while, both taking and losing advantages in their fight. Eventually Plo would start giving ground, and Dooku would swiftly maximise on his already significant advantage. Plo would be aware that T is not going to be able to help anytime soon, and he knows he can't hold Dooku off long enough for her to defeat Maul, so he does the only thing he can do to ensure his friend's safety. He throws a powerful force push at Dooku, who either gets hit and flies back a fair amount, sticking the landing without any damage naturally, or dodges. Using the small opening either result would give him, Plo throws a torrent of electric judgment Maul's way, shocking his muscles and damaging his cybernetic legs. Dooku immediately throws his own torrent of lightning at Plo, who can't defend completely thanks to his leaving himself open in his attack on Maul. He takes a bad hit and is thrown backwards onto the floor. Maul and Plo are both going to be out of the fight for a bit while they recover.
T reacts immediately to Maul being shocked, and slices his saber in half. She now has an all-important choice. Calling on the Force to enhance her senses, she takes the slightest moment to think.
Does she cut down Maul while he's briefly incapacitated, or does she fly to the defense of her friend, who is moments away from being ended by Dooku? It's no choice at all. She unleashes the Force to her fullest extent, flying straight between Dooku and the incapacitated Plo, who at this point would be dead without her intervention. She does, stopping Dooku in his tracks and preventing his killing blow, forcing him to re-engage her. Maul physically recovers quickly, but his cybernetic legs are another matter entirely. He quickly puts his Mekuduru talents to work, forcing the energies of the dark side into the short-circuited prosthetics. At this point in the fight, Dooku is flagging, his skill advantage definitely brought down a notch by the beginnings of fatigue. T's offense is going to be pressing him hard. She has a lot more energy left to give. They go at it with a blaze of speed and precision, absolute equals in that moment. Dooku knows that he doesn't have as much fight left in him as the younger Degruta does, far from it. Plo recovers, around this point in roughly the same level of physical condition as in his fight with Ventress, but he moves to back up T, taking a support role in the fight so as to not get in her way. Dooku attempts the same strategy the Jedi used at the start of the fight, trying to work the two into each other's way, but it doesn't work anywhere near as well thanks to their superior teamwork. Neither Jedi is going to take a blow in the back from Maul. Plo's keeping an eye on him, and T has her montral awareness, not to mention both of their general force awarenesses. Dooku is too tired to perform his usual methods of fighting multiple opponents. No acrobatics to be had here, just pure swordplay. He has no chance of matching both T's speed and Plo's strength at once without the use of his best evasion. He can't get through T's increasingly flamboyant movements either, because Plo is going to be hacking back his every strike. He gets desperate. He summons up all the energy he can and, while feigning a lunge at T, shoots a blast of lightning straight at Plo's predictable counter. Plo, as is the norm for him when protecting allies, leaves himself too open and is sent flying back, knocked straight into unconsciousness. Broken ribs and probably some nasty internal bleeding taking him straight out of the fight. T uses the opening, swinging around Dooku and piercing his heart with a lunge of her own, probably losing a Montreal or Leku herself to his attempted counter, only surviving at all thanks to a swift dodge. She slashes Dooku's sabre in half as he falls, calls Plo's own to her with the Force, and walks towards a recovered and charging Maul.
Maul has forced his legs back into action with his Metru Deru technique, and he has both the fury of battle and the joy of Dooku's demise fueling his charge at T. However, he only has one saber to her too, and she is fighting as brutally as she can with her sabers and the Force, knowing that without medical attention, Plo is dead. She is a blur of saber blades, quickly outmaneuvering the Zabrak's blunt assault. His blade work far less refined with his single sword. She uses Maul's offensive momentum against him, spinning around his guard and lunging at exposed defenses. He is not finished yet, however. He manages to evade her attacks and only receives a few burn marks. Both duelists ramp up the force speed, trying to get the edge over their opponent. If Maul had more than his single blade, he would have been a match to T's barrage. But T had the tactical foresight to remove Dooku's saber from the equation. After many clashes of sabers and subsequent workarounds of T's second blade, Maul would recognize defeat. Lashing out with a powerful blast of telekinetic power, he would flee as fast as his failing mechanical legs would carry him, leaving T to tend to her broken friend.
And so, we declare Plo Koon and Shaak T the battered and broken victors. Well, there you have it. Antoine and I's second collaboration. 4 months in the making. I truly hope that it was worth the wait, even if, and I'm sure this will be the case with the large majority, you disagree with the verdict. Please let me know what you think of the improvements in quality, as for once I'm actually happy with how it turned out, and as I said before, new videos should be coming soon, so look out for them. Until then, this is Retty4 signing off.